All right. We are back, everyone. Thank you for being flexible last week. There's just enough going on that I needed an unexpected break from this story because I wanted to give chapter 14 its time and its space because I don't know if there's as much life applications, but there's a big, long, fun story that I wanted us to be able to talk about in the just to give an idea of how things are going with Saul's reign and specifically getting an idea about his son Jonathan, who's going to become a important character in the story. So first and foremost, as I was doing a little background research to make sure that I knew what we were talking about today, I found some interesting little pieces that I thought I would start with first and foremost one question that I had, which was how old is King Saul at the in this chapter? How old is he at the end of his reign and how long is his reign? And we talked about this a little bit the last time we met, that there is a missing piece of information that it seems like the time jump is an uncertain amount of time that we got at the beginning of chapter 13. It's thought to be 20 or 22 years between when Saul starts and where this episode's kind of happening. But there's a little factoid that appears in the book of Acts where Paul, formerly Saul, same name, different guy, um, he is talking, Paul and Barnabas are talking in Antioch, and it is Acts 13, verse 21, and he makes the offhanded comment, then they asked for a king, i.e., Israel. And God gave them Saul, son of Kish, a man of the tribe of Benjamin, who reigned for 40 years. So it seems like if we're putting context clues together, because this kind of will put us in a good frame of mind going forward too. It best guesses we zoomed forward 20 or 22 years, which puts us kind of in the middle of King Saul's reign. If we're expecting him to rule for a total of 40 years, we're kind of in the middle of it all. We kind of skipped through the first part, which we're going to assume if we didn't hear much, it's probably actually because it went pretty well. We are now at the point where Saul has an adult son. His adult son is Jonathan. We don't get that at the beginning of, or no, we do get that at the beginning of this story. But we get the idea that Jonathan is his own person away from his dad, because chapter 14, well, the end of 13 begins, or 13 ends with, there's a garrison of Philistines had gone out and to this pass, and Jonathan gets the idea that he is going to sneak away and attack these Philistines by himself. So, what is our initial opinion of this young man, Jonathan, who decides just to go out, not tell his dad, the king, and just bring one guy with him, the guy who carries his armor? Just these two are gonna go out. What are we expecting from a person like this?
He's got a lot of faith in his God.
Yeah, he does.
Hey, yeah, yeah.
Two men aren't going to accomplish much of anything,
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think it's kind of interesting. Right in that chapter, right before it says Saul and Jonathan are the only ones who have the tools that the Philistines make, and you think to yourself, well, how did they get them? So obviously the two of them had some kind of a little extra power in the whole thing. It wasn't like his whole family had these swords. It was Jonathan, and Jonathan is like a whippersnapper. I'm going to go out and do what I want to do. Yeah. But it's kind of a strange story, frankly. I think the whole thing is.
So I'm trying to think of an analogy, and the best I can come up with is thinking about World War One, not two, but one. Because World War One was the last time that certain militaries had a cavalry unit. So we saw in World War One there was troops on horseback that went up against tanks. And this was not good. That's why cavalries kind of went out of use after World War One, because horses versus tanks is not a fair fight. So if you can imagine, Israel is more on the side of like they have the equivalent of they have horses and the Philistines have tanks. Except the king and his son have the tools. And you know what? If anyone in a kingdom is going to have like the fancy tools, it's probably going to be the two people in charge. But this is your regular reminder that these two groups are also in two stages of human development. The Philistines have discovered bronze. There we go. They have discovered bronze. Their weapons are sturdier. The Israelites are still in the Iron Age, a lot more fragile. But Gretchen, thank you for reminding us in the previous chapter. Evidently, all the forges and sharpening things are out of commission due to the battles. Therefore, they can't even sharpen the weapons they do have. So, not looking pretty good, is it? So it quickly switches perspectives from Jonathan saying, "Hey, I have this idea. Let's just go out. I'm going to see what trouble I can stir up." And then it switches back to his father, who is on the outskirts of this one city. It is not consistent through the text what city this is. So that aside, he has a good number of troops, about 600 with him. And then we get some interesting factoids. We have Abijah, son of Ahutub, and Ichabod's brother, and Phinehas, son of Eli. So these three are all priests. Eli is not there, but he has three priests. Two of them are from, if you remember that story about the shrine that's set up with the Levi, that's kind of an unofficial shrine. Two of these priests are from the unofficial shrine, and one of them is Eli's son that was refused the title or the handoff of power. So little throwaway details, but what are we learning about Saul if he's surrounded by priests, but not Eli, not his old buddy Eli? What decisions is Saul making here?
He's doing it on his own. And in this passage, I think it's interesting too, where Jonathan asks his armor bearer, kind of, well, what should I do? And the armor bearer tells him what to do. That's not really asking God too much. I mean, that's kind of.
No, God comes into it, but yeah, initially Jonathan's not like, "Hey, God, should I go attack the Philistines?" It's just like, "Hey, buddy, do you think we can go do this?" As opposed to Saul, with three priests, do we expect Saul to be asking what to do from who, or is he asking permission?
If he's talking to anybody, he is talking to those priests.
Yeah.
But I thought has Phineas hasn't died yet?
Nope.
Weren't they the one that didn't they die? And then Eli fell over backwards and died.
You're right.
Phineas and
Hold on. I think Eli may have had four sons and the older two died.
oh, okay.
If let me double check this. Yeah, that you are correct that Eli's sons did die, but I do think he had four of them.
Okay.
So I went
It,
back and I checked, and one of these guys is I mean, it says there it's Eli's son.
right, it does say that, yeah. But that doesn't make sense. And because stories were put together,
Yeah,
there
you
would be
never know.
times when things wouldn't quite
Hmm.
make sense.
Now Jonathan snuck off, but he didn't get in trouble with his father then,
No.
which was really strange. His father just joined him and took advantage of yeah. Uh, I was wondering what that was all about. He got
Right.
in trouble for something kind of minor. Well, yeah, putting a bit of honey to his lips.
We'll get to that in a moment, but
Okay.
There's kind of an odd thing. It seems like some of the Israelites were with the Philistines,
Yeah.
fighting with them in a counterinsurgency or fighting against the Israelites or just being with them. I found this all pretty
Yeah.
confusing.
there are distinctions being made that are very subtle that we don't always pick up on. So we
Okay.
tend to use the terms Hebrew and Israelite interchangeably, and they're not really interchangeable terms. I am even guilty of this, of just like what comes off the top of my head. But in 21 specifically, it says, now the Hebrews who had previously been with the Philistines,
Mhm.
what they are talking about is an ethnic group of people. The people who are ethnically Hebrew, but not necessarily Israelites. They share a
Mm.
common ancestry, but they're not necessarily they are not self-identifying with the nation of Israel or with the 12 clans, if that makes sense. So that is an
Mhm.
ethnic group. And so there is a group piece of this ethnic group that is with the other side. And when they see that the Israelites are winning, they're like, you know what? We're gonna go hang out with our kinfolk. It's actually probably a better idea that we join our our cousins, basically.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Anyways, to return to Saul, why I want to draw out this is, once again, I'm a little bit of a Saul apologist. I do think he got dealt a sad hand in life. Um, we see that Saul constantly has advisors around him. He has three priests, and he is like surrounding, like Eli's not willing to be a part of that anymore. But so he has sought out other advisors and other people to help him talk to God. And this will come back around a little bit later, but I think it's important that he does have priest near him. It's like he learned his lesson that he's not necessarily going to do the thing he's not supposed to do. So he's surrounding himself with other people who theoretically could do this. Which we'll compare that to what King David does in a little while. But just keep that in mind. Like Saul, I believe he is trying his best. But then it flips back to Jonathan and the story with him and his armor bearer. And he's like, Jonathan's like, okay, let's go kill these uncircumcised swine. And there's basically uh, a rocky crag. There's a natural division that makes it hard to pass one side or the other. So the two troops can pretty much see each other, but there's this big divot in between them. And the two words are translated to be, the one side is called swampy, the other side is called thorny. So they need to cross through swamps and thorns to get to the other side. And so they kind of crawl down into this crag and they're having this discussion and they're like, okay, we're gonna pop out. And this is the one time Jonathan's like, let's leave this up to God. If they come to us, we're gonna run away. If they come to us, not a good sign. But if they invite us forward, like, oh me, oh my, that's our sign that we're gonna win. And so they pop out of the rock, and the Philistines are like, hey, I want to show you something, which is a taunt. And we're given very little description, but evidently Jonathan and his armor bearer kill about 20 people right away, and then cause such confusion in the camp that everyone starts just running every direction. So what do we think about Jonathan, his plan, and like once again, what are we learning about Jonathan here?
Well, he kind of has his own way of fighting. I mean, his own way of doing things.
Mm-hmm.
But
New, and it wins.
he's also certain of what the outcome is before he does it, at least from what he said. He says, if they invite us over, then God's going to see that we are going to win. And that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. So
But so he only killed 20 people. That made a huge. Was it because it was so sudden and unexpected that it caused so much panic?
I mean, if you're one person versus 20 and you win.
Okay, it was just him. It wasn't his.
No, it's armor bearer too.
I mean, his armor bearer's in it. Okay, so it's two people versus 20.
Okay.
That's still superhero numbers.
It is, absolutely.
An odd question is, what is the significance of the pomegranate tree? Is it's way back, and Saul was staying under the pomegranate. I mean, I know like a fig tree has, but does a pomegranate have any kind of significance in this story?
So I don't know this offhand. This is my educated guess, just knowing general ancient history. Pomegranates are often a representation of fertility or virility, just because of the number of seeds they have. That's a symbol. So
oh yeah.
I don't know how that affects this story is the thing. Like,
yeah.
I don't actually know. See if a quick Google brings up anything else. Oh, pomegranates. Ooh, what did that say? Pomegranates symbolize the richness of God's love, the passion of his sacrifice, and the completeness of his blessing.
Oh.
Okay.
So it's a good place to be.
Yeah. Right.
And he had lunch.
So there's a few things being shown here. So Saul is back from the front lines eating lunch under a tree. That is showing a sign of luxury, where Saul is no longer fighting on the front lines. This might be due to age, like he's not as young as he once was. He has adult sons now. But it's also showing he may be starting to enjoy the fruits of his position. His troops are out there, but he is having this lovely lunch with his priest advisors under a nice tree. While his son decides to go out in the trenches, literally walking through and becoming an ancient superhero. The thing that we can see in this one interaction is Jonathan also likely has more military training and expertise than your average soldier, which would be fairly standard for a prince. But if you can think of the people who are at the edge of the camp, they're not going to be your generals or officers. They're going to be your foot soldiers on night duty. And so this is not necessarily a fair fight, But I mean, think of the difference between Luke Skywalker fighting the stormtroopers. Like, that's kind of the balance of power we're seeing. So Jonathan, with a little bit more training and actually having a sword, is able to take out at least 20 of your common people, but it's enough to throw the camp into chaos of like, what's happening? We didn't know we were being attacked. What's happening? There's one dude, he just took out a lot of us. Yeah, Gary, do you have a thought?
Well, yeah, I just had a graphic in my head that they the way they were positioned, opposing each other, that the Philistines could see all the action, and when there was one, and then they just kept killing off. It's like, hey, it's stupid to walk into that machine. There's something about it. These two guys are killing our guys off just one right after the other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think psychologically, it's like there's something we got to get out of here.
Mhm.
Right. There's a crazy man. Let's get away from the crazy man.
Mhm.
Because also, what does it say that one guy is just confident enough just to walk in and start killing people? That is not a sane person. Let's leave. So I think, Gary, that's a great mental image there. But what happens, so Saul, all of a sudden, like, enough commotion happens on the other side of this big crevasse that you can hear it from the other side, and Saul like runs out and goes, "What's happening? Who's missing?" Like, someone's over there, and they do an inventory, and they're like, "Sir, your son is missing." And what he decides to do is take advantage of the situation. It's like, "Oh, okay, Jonathan started this, full force ahead." And he just rolls with it. Like, he's not mad. He just decides, okay, we're going to take advantage of this. Which is, who brought up that, like, it's almost surprising that Saul's not mad that his son snuck out and started a battle without his knowledge.
Yeah.
So anything that we're learning from about, like, this is in some ways, we're learning a lot about people's character, even in this kind of weird story. What do we learn about King Saul if he sees that A, his son is missing, and B, chaos is ensuing, and he decides to go with it? What are we learning about him? Yeah, Larry.
Well, if Saul is still the official military leader, he's going to see, even though he may not agree with what Jonathan started, it's obviously could be worked to their advantage. So if he puts now everybody in, they've got a good chance maybe of doing away with the Philistines.
He's very pragmatic. He doesn't stop to ask God if it's okay.
So that is actually maybe true, maybe not. It depends on translation. So if you look at verse 18, Saul calls over one of the priests and says, "Bring the Ark of the Covenant here."
Oh.
It's in the Septuagint. So the Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew text. It is not always accurate. It has its own problems. It made specific choices. We know sometimes, once again, we just know by looking at it that it's wrong. However, there are some times where it's like, maybe it got something that changed later on with the Hebrew text. Anyways, I say that to say, in the Septuagint, Saul asked for the priest to come over to bring the ephod close. So the ephod, if you remember, is the priestly breastplate, because it's thought that what he wants to do is check with, let's see, hold on. I have my picture. I've forgotten to bring it up as a reminder. We have the Urim and the Thurim, which are these two stones, which this is how they are casting lots to decide what God wants. We'll talk about this a little bit later because these come up again, but there's a thought that in the Septuagint they either recorded it differently or they changed it to say, hey, priests, come over here, let me cast lots to see what God wants. Even if it's the Ark of the Covenant, it's like, hey, priest, bring the Ark of the Covenant close, we need to talk to God about this. So it does seem like Saul is still trying to consult with the Lord before he jumps into battle.
Okay.
So once again, what are we learning about Saul? That he's been told, like, he is a doomed king, his sons will not reign, Eli wants nothing to do with him, and he's still surrounding himself with priests, and when this happens, he's like, bring it close, bring God close, bring him here. What are we learning about him? What's going on in his head? What is he hoping for? What is kind of his standard practice?
Well, it's like saying I don't believe in prayer, but I do it every day just in case.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's an interesting way to put it. He's like, I'm a doomed king, but I'm still gonna talk to God.
But yeah, right. Maybe there's an outside chance he'll change his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And also he still wants to win. I mean, he's doing the kingly thing, trying to achieve victory for the people of Israel and himself, of course, too, but
Yeah. He still cares. He cares what God thinks. He cares what the priests think. He cares for his people, which is, once again, Saul is kind of a tragic person. Anyway, so they get the sign, like, go for it. And like we mentioned before, the Hebrew people, the people who are ethnically similar to these people, decide to switch sides, turn the tide of battle, and now the Philistines are fleeing and the Hebrews are winning. And the Lord gave Israel a victory that day. So, all around ended up well this time around. But the story continues. So evidently around this time, Saul also made a rash action and made an oath before he sent the troops out to not eat anything before a victory was achieved. And I was curious if, once again, this kind of an oath sounded familiar from a story we've heard before.
I can't remember it.
Yeah, which we've obviously forgotten.
It's okay.
Well, in the wilderness, all
Somebody didn't
was
eat.
So, if you remember in the book of Judges, there is a warrior who, his name is Jephthah, who he's kind of cast out of his family, and then they ask him for help to win against the enemies, and he makes a rash vow that he will sacrifice anything that comes out of his front door first if he wins this battle. And it doesn't go well then either, because he ends up having to sacrifice his daughter.
His daughter.
So rash oaths typically don't go well in scripture. And this time, Saul is saying anyone who eats before the victory is achieved, they are going to be put to death. Unbeknownst to his son Jonathan, who was off in the other camp, because he's the one who started it, he didn't hear it, he doesn't know about his dad's oath. Evidently, the troops are famished, they're tired, and then Jonathan's like, oh, look, we found some honey. And he just eats just like a little bit of honey. And I love the description. And his eyes were brightened. And the troops tell him, dude, that was not a good idea. Your dad made this oath. And Jonathan doesn't seem scared. He just laments that, oh, that wasn't smart. If we could have eaten like partway through the day, we would have had more spoils of war. So what do you think of this situation of, like, you can't eat until you win, and Jonathan saying we should have stopped and had a snack along the way?
But there's also this kind of little we didn't really eat it, kind of this like, well, it was on the ground and we didn't really touch it. We didn't pick it up. But we, you know, it was just there. That's
Sucking
so
dick into
weird.
Mm-hmm.
Got it before the ants did.
Uh-huh.
Well, they did something else too.
Mm-hmm. Well, it creates a situation later on. So these are big, strong fighting men, and I'll be honest, I've never thought about this. I don't know how long battles last. I guess, yeah, at some point it makes sense to stop and eat. I don't know how you do that when you're on the battlefield. That's just something I don't fully understand. But by the end of the day, and it looks like they've won, the troops are famished, and so they just start cutting into animals. Like the Philistine animals, they just start cutting them open and eating them directly because they are so hungry. They're like, we don't have time to cook them. We don't even have time to bleed them. We are literally going to eat raw flesh straight out of the animal. So the thing is, this is one where I was doing also a little bit of research to like look at some of the details of this, because eating flesh with the blood still in it is one of the big ancient no-nos. It's mentioned in Deuteronomy. I did not look up that verse. I did look up Leviticus 19:26. You shall not eat anything with blood in it. Simple, straightforward. Don't do it. But it's also one of the oldest commandments in the Bible, because this is one of the commandments God gives Noah. So after the flood, one of the first, like, there is a little bit of blessings, be fruitful and multiply, don't fear, rainbows, and then Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, only you shall not eat flesh with its life, that is its blood in it. For your own lifeblood I surely require as a reckoning for every animal. And so it's one of those that these people, like the soldiers being so hungry that they're just eating like bloody flesh, is one of the biggest ancient no-nos, and it is seen that this is Saul's fault because he told him they couldn't eat earlier. So not the best situation. However, this one is remedied because Saul is like, hey, pause. Let me at least sacrifice them first and then you can eat it. So this is thought to be like Saul's first altar that he sets up, and he like officially cuts it open. And the idea is that if you cut an animal open on an elevated rock, it gives the blood chance to pool off of the rock rather than cutting it open on the ground and it just kind of sits in its own blood. Putting it on the rock drains it of its blood. So what do we think of this situation here? Is this Saul's fault for not allowing them to eat? Is this just one of the things that happens in battle, or?
Well, apparently he thought if they were hungry, they'd fight harder, right? It would
evidently.
And it does. But they do fight hard, but that's kind of stupid. Well, first he changes the situation and drains the blood, but then he still punishes his son.
Because this is the part that is kind of weird. Theoretically, the people who ate the bloody meat have sinned, but the thought is maybe by doing it ritualistically, it actually acts as a sacrifice as like an offering to counter the sin that they just did.
Okay.
Maybe.
Okay.
But you're right. The next thing that happens is Jonathan's in danger. And so the next step is Saul is like, okay, the Philistines are on the run. Let's go and like finish the job. Let's go after them. We're going to leave the spoils of war. And the people say, okay, do what seems good to you. The people are going to follow along. The priest, however, advise him like, hey, let's ask God first. And they throw those 2 stones and it shows, no, don't do this. Don't go. And that's when Saul starts freaking out of like, wait, what? What's going on? Has someone sinned? They throw the stones again. Yes, someone has sinned. And so this is where you create we've seen this before, where you do a lineup and you throw the stones and they either come up with like a yay or a nay, depending on what you're asking. So the 2 stones, so I'm going to show you the picture again, just to give you all an idea. This is Proto-Hebrew, so this will turn into the Hebrew alphabet. This is what they look like in modern Hebrew. The stones read from right to left, as the Hebrew text does. This is an aleph, the beginning of their alphabet. You can see it looks like a sideways A. That is because the corollary letter to their aleph is our A. And this eventually turns into a T. You can, our alphabet derives from the same proto-script. It's really fascinating. Anyways, the aleph, or let's see, which one's which? I believe. All right, I don't quote me on this, but I believe that this one means cursed and this one means accounted for whole or acquitted. So if you're throwing them and you're asking, is this person guilty? What you would want is, if the person's guilty, this one will turn up with the word showing, and this one, they're blank on the other side. So this one would turn up all black without the word. If they are guilty, or if they're acquitted, this one would show up with the word on it and this one blank. And if they show up both words up or both words blank, you throw them again until you get an answer, basically. So that's how you cast lots with these stones, is one has to be up and the other has to be down.
Oh.
And so they throw them for the people, and it shows acquitted, they're fine, all accounted for. You sacrificed the animals for the blood draining, they're good. And then Saul and Jonathan comes up guilty. And then Saul's like, excuse me? And then they throw it for Saul, and it's like, all accounted for, acquitted, you're fine. But it comes up with Jonathan for being guilty. And so this is when Jonathan has to say, hey, I ate some honey. I didn't know because you didn't tell me that this was bad. And King Saul's like, okay, well, I made an oath. I said, you'll have to die, so you're gonna die. And Jonathan's like, okay, I guess I'm dying then. And just seems to accept it. Here I am, I will die. But the people have a problem with this. And then the people say, hey, it's because of him that we won today, so let's not kill him. And instead they use a term that I think helps us understand some Christian theology. They say that they, where's the word?
Ransomed.
Yes, they will ransom Jonathan, which means they are substituting
30.
his punishment likely on another animal or another sacrifice. They're like, okay, we want to save Jonathan. What do we have to kill in his place, is basically what they're doing. So they're willing to offer up animals of their own, maybe some other goodwill offerings, in order to save Jonathan's life. And they do. So what do we think of this whole situation of like, and at the end of it, Saul decides not to pursue the Philistines. Like, he just leaves them alone because he's like, okay, this isn't a good time for battle. We need to do some sacrifices. We need to purify ourselves. We are not in a good state with God in order to win that battle. So what do we learn about Jonathan? What are we learning about Saul? And what do we learn about the people? So first, what do we learn about Saul here?
Well, in some ways, he's lost face a little bit, because the people decided in Jonathan's favor. It's a little that's a little painful to have this son who did wrong. And, on the other hand, I don't think he really wanted to kill Jonathan, but Jonathan did kind of gained the favor of the people, which is kind of can be risky in a succession.
Yeah, I think I think that Saul is pragmatic. He's not going to. He's not rigid, not about things. He will see what works best.
I think the fact that the people have become strong enough to stand up and challenge things is a positive.
Mm-hmm.
And it might be to the credit of their leaders. It's just like, no, this is ridiculous. You're not going to kill the guy that helped us win this battle. And it's a double standard. All those that ran over and ate all the flesh and the blood, you left them off the hook. And this guy took a dip of honey. And he didn't even know that you'd made the oath. So it's just, I think, it's a positive sign for the civilization at that point, or the group, the public, I guess. Sorry, I read these things, I guess, different than everybody else.
No.
Well,
No.
I sort of think, Gary, too, that kind of is another point of Saul kind of being the loser in this, in that the people prevailed.
So here's another point of view to consider. It's one of those that you can see Saul is kind of losing face here, and I think that's valid, like yes. But the other way you could potentially see it is it's actually a mutual act of trust here, where no one actually loses face because Saul made a vow and he is showing that he's willing to keep his vow, and his people say, hey, we see you willing to keep your vow. Good job. You're staying on the right side of God. We are willing to take the hit. So you save your dignity and your word and your oath. So Saul is not breaking his oath. The people are letting him off the hook because they like Jonathan. And it actually shows that they may trust Saul, that it may be a mutual act of you let King Saul off easy, with his honor intact. But it takes kind of trust on both sides for the people to say, like, hey, we see you, don't kill your son.
Nowadays, though, it's often said ignorance of the law is no excuse.
Right.
And this is beginning, they can say, well, after all, Jonathan didn't even know. How can you expect him to obey some law that he doesn't even know exists?
Right. Anyway, so there's some interesting dynamics here, but I do think it's interesting that, yeah, the people are speaking out, the people are willing to put their neck on the line. But all of this makes it so the oath is not broken. And I think that is important. The oath is not broken.
Yet.
And so Jonathan lives in the end. The story started with Jonathan kind of having this harebrained idea of, I'm going to go at him alone. And it ends with him being like, oh no, I'm going to be killed. And then the people are like, no, we got you, buddy. We like you. We're going to save you.
It doesn't mean that much, but when Jonathan went out originally, I thought he was going after the garrison. Now, I assume the garrison is like an arsenal, or they have weapons stored.
Mm-hmm.
So again, this is the way I was picturing it. As it turns out, he gets into a situation where uh, he's spotted and he's confronted by the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was reading it, I was thinking he was just going out to see if he could get behind lines, just the two of them, to get two of them and get to the garrison and get some weapons.
That that may have been the plan, yes. And thank you for picking up on that detail. I think you're right, Gary, that because their troops are under-resourced, they don't have weapons or sharp weapons. That may have been the initial idea of, hey, let's just sneak in and see if we can grab some swords and then leave. But the plan changes pretty early in the game.
I think that I'm skipping to the very last verse.
Mhm.
And when Saul saw any strong or valiant warrior, he took him into his service. And wasn't this the thing that Eli warned against? You take a king and he'll take your sons into service and they'll go to war. And so
Yep,
here it is, confirmed.
confirmed. Yep. Any strong lad, Saul's gonna conscript because he has a bunch of wars to fight. Um, yeah, so the end of this chapter, we get some more details about Saul. So a little bit of family details, a little bit of reign details. So we see that most of Saul's reign, he's at war. He doesn't really know peace. He is a military leader, a military king. So he fights against Moab, the Amorites, Edom. These are all the territories in and around Israel that we've seen pop up before. But also Zobah and the Philistines and the Amalekites, and he's rescued Israel out of the hands who have plundered them. So he kind of has been doing his job, kind of like the judges were, is he is saving the people. He is evidently a decently good military leader. He is winning these battles. But then we get a little bit about Saul's family. We see Saul has 3 sons. Jonathan is likely the oldest of them. Just because he is mentioned first. The other 2 don't really play into the biblical narrative after this. It's really only Jonathan that we will see come up later. He has 2 daughters. One of his daughters is the firstborn. We get that. So the first child is a daughter. He has an older and a younger one. They will come up. And we also have Saul's wife, who does not appear again. And so he fights hard against the Philistines all of his days. And he takes all the strong people and surrounds him. And so he has a pretty strong army, all things considered. So I keep asking, what are we learning about Saul and what are we learning about Jonathan? At the end, we have about 10 minutes remaining. At the end of the story, what's our opinion of Saul and Jonathan? What kind of people are these 2?
Warriors, fighters.
What makes you say that?
Well, they both, I mean, that's what they spend their time doing. You certainly can't say that either of these people are conciliatory or, there's no kind of nice way of establishing peace in the land. And I think for me, it's also kind of a reminder that they took this land and all around them, and people didn't like it, and they keep up. They don't forget.
Yeah, God said it was theirs, and they're going to do what God said.
At the same time, it sounds like people around them are doing the exact same thing. It was just a very violent time in this region. And one of the things that is always important is remembering how the terrain sometimes affects the culture. where Egypt is stable. Egypt is stable for like so much of human history. It's actually kind of ridiculous, but it's because their climate is so stable that the weather has always been regular. The food doesn't like the crops from one year to the next don't really vary. They have a stable farmland. They have stable dynasties for centuries.
Hmm.
This area is not Egypt. It is a hard scrabble place. It fluctuates between deserts and lush green land, but the weather is so much more temperamental. But also the area that you can farm and the area that you can herd sheep is very small. So it's not like, I mean, if you think of in the United States, Kansas, you can just have farmland for miles and miles and miles. It's a hard scrabble place. So if you get good farmland, people are going to fight over it because there's not much of it. Water is in short supply, so you want to control the wells. And so there's a part where the hard scrabble nature of the landscape creates a more infighting group of people. It's harder to find peace when there's less resources.
Mhm.
And yet the Europeans came over here and took the land away from the Native Americans. And,
Yep. Yeah, well, yes.
Yeah.
And
It was
I
a lot
guess
bigger, though. You know, I was thinking about how little Israel is, and there's a lot of fighting over it because there's not much. It's the same.
It's about the size of New Jersey.
Yeah.
So anything else so we kind of have our biggest introduction to Jonathan. So what are some of your thoughts or character descriptions of Jonathan?
He seems very self-confident, and um, he doesn't go to his father and ask permission. He has a lot of confidence in himself.
I feel that his father had taught him well, and he was ready to go. He had great confidence in God and his own personal abilities, and
Yeah.
I think that was my impression.
Yeah.
Okay. So Jonathan would be the one to inherit the throne if Saul's reign had not already been condemned almost from the start. Do we think that Jonathan is prepared to be king? I mean, think of the last two or the last few sets of sons of important people that we've read about. What do we think about Jonathan as the potential heir to the throne?
He's a bit of a loose cannon.
Yeah. He has a loose cannon.
Mm-hmm.
He also doesn't have the priestly piece. He would just be a warrior. He wouldn't have the other qualities you need to be a king.
So while Saul is surrounding himself with priests, even if it's not Eli, he still has that godly connection where Jonathan has great faith but isn't quite checking in.
He doesn't say wise things either.
Okay. There's another thing that Jonathan has going for him. And I think Jonathan has a better PR strategy than his dad. That the people like Jonathan. And that's apparent across the board. Jonathan's a pretty well-liked guy. So he might be a loose cannon, he might be a little bit, have a wild hair, but the people were willing to stick their necks out on the line when Jonathan's life was in danger. And I think that's important to know just to put things in context. So. So any other details we didn't cover, or things we are gleaning from this story that's kind of this crazy wartime battle? Oh, look at this. Look at Jonathan do fun things.
Uh, uh, I guess it sort of says God is still on the side of the Israelites, huh?
Yeah.
Sort of reassuring from that standpoint.
Mhm. Okay. Well, I don't have any great takeaways from this story. I don't know if, as I said in the beginning, I don't know if there's a lot of life application here, but it gives us a lot of personality
application.
information that's going to come into play as we move forward. Because David is about to be introduced, not next chapter, but the following one. And David's going to shake things up, and I think it's good to keep our character descriptions in mind. That, like Saul, he may not be a perfect king, but he is a king that cares, and he's doing his best. His son, Jonathan, a decent guy, kind of wild, but like people like him, and he seems to be on the at least the right-ish track. But kind of in the same way that, I mean, at the beginning of the story of Romeo and Juliet, Shakespeare says in the prologue, these two are gonna die.
Mhm.
We kind of have that same sense in this story of like, we're getting to know this family, we're getting to know Saul, we're getting to know Jonathan. We like Jonathan. I don't know about you, but I appreciate him. He seems, I don't know if I want him to be king, but he seems like he would be a fun guy to go to the bar with and have a drink. But we know from the beginning of the story where it's going. If Saul's reign is doomed and his lineage is doomed, what does that say about Jonathan?
Mhm.
Doomed.
Doomed. Doomed with the rest of his family.
Yeah,
Yeah, Larry.
it's sort of fascinating from the standpoint of an experience, at least that Gina and I happened to have. We were in Syria in 1996 when Assad's father, was leaving. He'd either died or he was going to turn over the kingdom to his youngest son that he had groomed to take over. Unfortunately, the youngest son happened to be a bit of a playboy. He loved fast sports cars, and he killed himself in an accident.
Mm.
That left just his elder brother, Basha, who happened to be an ophthalmologist of all, and who had always said, I don't want anything to do about running this country. You know, I'm an eye doctor. And Basha was forced into taking over and then became this terrible despot, I gather, you know, a horrible dictator that ruled until just last week or this week, I guess. Yeah. Just strange how in the family, you know, if you've got a monarchy or a dictatorship or some inherited familial sort of thing, you're certainly limited in your choices of who you get to be leader.
And he ruled for a really long time until what, day before yesterday?
Yeah, yeah. But he was a physician. How could a physician be such a cruel,
Yeah.
uncaring sort of person? I mean, to me, that just blows my mind.
So that, if maybe not for Jonathan, is an interesting thought with where Saul goes. Because Saul's downfall happens long before he is killed. It's not just that like he's a pretty decent king and then oh no, he dies in battle. Like Saul's gonna have a downfall, and a lot of people have wondered, like Saul may not be. I mean, there's no king in this Bible I mean, if we keep going with the kings of Israel, none of them are perfect. Let me tell you, they are all extremely human, including David. David is I would argue David does more wrong in the text than Saul does. But that's a story for a different day. But it's like, where did this guy who like is checking in with God, who is surrounded by priests, where did he go wrong? Like, what actually happened? And when we get to those things, it will be easy to say, like, what mental illness is he suffering from? Because he has a lot of troubles on him that we would describe certain ways today.
Mhm.
But it's like, where do decent people go wrong? Anyways, any other final thoughts? All right. Well, we'll wrap it up for today. Next week, let's read chapter 15. So just one more chapter. We're gonna be reminded of Saul being a doomed king. And then in the new year, we can pick up with the beginning of David's story. So for the last 2 weeks of December, we won't meet. I won't be here. Well, not this week, but 2 weeks from now, it's Christmas Eve. And no offense, I'm not going to be doing Bible study on Christmas Eve.
No.
Anyways,
All right, one more.
so let's close with a word of prayer. Gracious and loving God, we give you so much thanks that we, in our faith, are told that you are gracious and give us so much grace, because we know exactly the things that we have done, that we do in our past, in our present, that are less than ideal. God, we really struggle to be the people we want to live up to our ideals every second of the day. And we're just grateful that we aren't punished for things like eating when someone else has made a vow that we shouldn't eat, or that we can do small things in which we're trying our best that are less than ideal, that doom us. So we just ask for your guidance and for your grace. Help us be good in response when we realize we've done something wrong. Help us amend the things that have gone sideways so that we can repair relationships and truly make the world the best place it can be, and our relationships the most loving that it can be. So guide us this week and in the weeks to come, until we're able to gather again together. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Thank you, Chris.
Of course.
Have a great week.
Y'all do the same. Bye.
Bye.